The town of Silver Fork sat in a narrow mountain valley in western Colorado, the kind of place that only existed because a railroad once needed water and never left. Fewer than 400 people lived there year-round. Most of them worked the highway, the timber yards, or the small weather monitoring station on the ridge north of town. I was assigned to that station in late October. The building itself was a squat concrete structure anchored into the granite, with a steel tower rising above it like a needle. My job was simple: maintain instruments, log atmospheric data, and relay readings to a regional center in Grand Junction. It was the kind of post they gave to people who didn't mind being alone. I didn't mind. From the ridge, the valley looked carved out by something patient and ancient. Pines covered the slopes in thick, dark waves. The highway ran through the center like a pale scar. At night, the town lights were small and warm, a pocket of civilization floating in black wilderness. The first week was uneventful. Wind readings, pressure drops, the occasional early snow. The radio hummed softly in the background, cycling through automated weather chatter. I kept a thermos of coffee beside the console and read old paperbacks while the instruments did their quiet work. But there was a detail I noticed on the third night. The valley didn't echo. I stepped outside just after midnight to clear frost from the wind gauge. The air was so still it felt padded. When I shut the steel door behind me, the sound didn't bounce back from the mountains the way it should have. It simply ended. Absorbed. I clapped my hands once. Nothing returned. It wasn't true silence. The wind whispered in the trees below. Somewhere, water moved under ice. But the shape of the space felt wrong, as if the valley had depth without reflection. I stood there longer than I meant to, listening, waiting for my own footsteps to come back to me. They never did. The first anomaly showed up in the logs 2 nights later. A pressure spike. Not a storm front. Not turbulence. A sharp vertical line in the data that climbed and fell in less than 2 seconds. The instruments registered it as a localized compression event, the kind you might see near an explosion. But there was no sound, no flash, no seismic activity. I reset the sensors and ran diagnostics. Everything came back clean. At 2:17 a.m., it happened again. This time I felt it. A brief tightening in my chest, like the air had thickened. My ears popped softly. The lights in the station dimmed for a fraction of a second. The radio hissed and went silent. Then it returned, carrying a thin metallic tone that hadn't been there before. I called it in. The operator in Grand Junction said they saw nothing unusual on their end. No atmospheric disturbances. No grid fluctuations. He suggested a faulty transducer and told me to flag it for maintenance. But the spike repeated 4 more times before dawn. Each one identical. Each one silent. By morning, the town was talking about missing livestock. 2 ranchers reported that entire sections of fencing had been left open, gates bent outward as if pushed from the inside. No tracks in the mud. No blood. Just empty pasture and animals gone. Coyotes didn't do that. Bears didn't open gates. The sheriff drove up to the station that afternoon to ask if I'd seen helicopters or low-flying aircraft during the night. I told him no. The sky had been clear. The stars unusually sharp. He nodded but didn't look convinced. As he left, he paused at the door. "You hear anything up here?" he asked. "Anything strange?" I thought about the silence. The way the valley swallowed sound. "No," I said. That wasn't entirely true. I'd started hearing a faint hum beneath the radio static. A steady, subsonic vibration that wasn't picked up by any of the microphones. It wasn't loud. It was felt more than heard. And it never stopped. The hum spread through town within 2 days. People described it differently. A pressure behind the eyes. A distant engine that never approached. A ringing that settled into the bones. The clinic filled with complaints of headaches and nausea. Dogs refused to go outside after dark. Birds vanished from the power lines. The weather instruments began to behave unpredictably. Wind readings dropped to 0 during visible gusts. Temperature fluctuated by 10 degrees in seconds. The radar screen bloomed with a pale circular artifact centered directly over the valley, a perfect ring that didn't correspond to any known pattern. I tried to recalibrate. The system rejected every correction. At night, the lights started. I saw them first from the tower ladder. Small white points suspended high above the ridge line. Too steady for stars. Too low for satellites. They didn't move in arcs. They slid. Smoothly. Without acceleration. I counted 7. They formed a loose curve over the valley and held position for nearly an hour. My camera refused to focus on them. Every image blurred into streaks of pale smoke. When I looked at them through binoculars, I felt a sudden, crushing pressure in my ears. The hum grew louder. In town, the power grid began to fail in patches. Streetlights flickered out. Radios filled with distorted voices that cut in and out like broken transmissions. Several residents reported losing minutes of time while driving the highway. One man found himself parked on the shoulder 20 miles from where he remembered being, engine cold. The sheriff organized a meeting at the community hall. I stood in the back and listened to people describe the same feeling. A sense of being watched from above. Not seen. Measured. When the generator failed mid-sentence and the room fell into darkness, no one screamed. We all held our breath. In that silence, the hum became a roar. It happened on the ridge. The lights descended just after midnight. I was outside again, drawn by a sudden stillness that felt deliberate. The trees had stopped moving. Even the hum had quieted, replaced by a dense, oppressive silence. The sky above the valley was empty except for one object. It hung directly overhead. At first I thought it was a gap in the stars, a circular absence. Then my eyes adjusted and I saw its edges, a faint distortion, like heat shimmer trapped in a perfect disk. It wasn't glowing. It was bending the darkness around it. The air smelled metallic. My skin prickled as if charged with static. Every hair on my arms stood upright. I tried to step back toward the station door and found my legs unresponsive, locked in place by a pressure that wasn't physical but absolute. The object didn't move. The world tilted toward it. Sound drained away. I couldn't hear my own breathing. My heartbeat slowed to a heavy, distant thud. The disk began to rotate, not visibly, but perceptibly. The stars behind it smeared into faint spirals. A line opened in the center. Not a seam, a subtraction. Something inside that absence shifted, and the pressure in my skull intensified until I tasted copper. I felt a presence press against my thoughts, not entering, but testing the surface. Like a hand against glass. I understood, in that moment, that it wasn't looking at me. It was looking through me. Time stretched. I don't know how long I stood there. My vision narrowed to a tunnel of gray light. The metallic smell thickened until I gagged. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the pressure released. I collapsed onto the gravel. The disk was gone. The hum returned in a violent surge, rattling the tower. The station lights flickered wildly. Somewhere in the valley, alarms began to howl. I crawled inside and checked the clock. 3 hours were missing. By morning, Silver Fork was no longer isolated. Unmarked vehicles lined the highway. Black SUVs. Mobile communication units. Men in plain jackets with government badges that flashed too quickly to read. They sealed off the ridge and confiscated every piece of recording equipment in the station. I tried to explain what I'd seen. They listened without writing anything down. In town, 5 people were missing. Their houses were intact. Doors locked. Coffee still warm in cups. One bed had the sheets peeled back as if someone had just stood up and stepped away. The official explanation was a coordinated evacuation drill. A training exercise. The missing residents were said to be assisting federal authorities. The statement aired once on a regional news channel and never again. The hum stopped that afternoon. The silence that replaced it was worse. Birds didn't return. The valley felt hollow, scraped clean. Conversations died quickly. People avoided the sky. At night, The town shut its curtains and pretended the darkness was ordinary. I began to experience gaps. Short at first, seconds lost while walking, then longer. I would find myself standing in a room without remembering entering it. My notebooks filled with handwriting I didn't recognize, diagrams of circles and lines that meant nothing to me when I looked at them later. A metallic taste lingered in my mouth for weeks. The government presence vanished as abruptly as it had arrived. The barricades came down. The highway reopened. Silver Fork was left with a warning not to discuss the incident due to ongoing atmospheric research. Most people obeyed. A few moved away. The weather station was decommissioned. I was reassigned. I left the valley in early December. Snow had begun to seal the roads. As I drove out, I stopped at a turnout overlooking the town. From that distance, Silver Fork looked unchanged. Smoke rose from chimneys. The river cut its frozen path through the trees. Peaceful. I clapped my hands once. The sound vanished. No echo. Years have passed since then. I've worked other stations, other mountains. I've chased storms across half the country. But sometimes, late at night, I feel that pressure return. A gentle tightening behind the eyes. A reminder. I've requested my records. Entire weeks are redacted. The missing residents were never listed as missing. Officially, they never existed. Census data adjusts around their absence like water around a stone. Photographs fade where they once stood. I've seen it happen. Faces blurring into background. The diagrams in my notebooks match star charts that won't exist for another century. I stopped trying to explain that part. Last month, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of thermal paper, the kind used in old weather instruments. A pressure log. A perfect spike. Time-stamped 3 nights ago. Location, Silver Fork. At the bottom of the page, printed in my own handwriting, was a note I do not remember writing. It never left. It's waiting for the valley to echo. I haven't slept since I read it. Sometimes, when the room is quiet enough, I hear the hum again. It's closer now. And every night, just before dawn, I clap my hands in the dark and wait to hear if the sound comes back. It never does.